Welcome to the Crazy Cool Family Podcast with Don and Suzanne Manning.
A podcast where we share with you great insights about everything family from over 30 years of parenting 7 kids and over a decade of equipping parents through our Crazy Cool Family ministry.
So let us inspire and equip you to build your best family.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Crazy Cool Family Podcast. Don here. And man, we've got a very, very interesting guest. Marcus, introduce yourself to us a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name is Marcus Warner. I'm the president of Deeper Walk International. And we like to tell people our name is our mission. We help people experience a deeper walk with God by dealing with issues of the heart. And the basic premise is that most people are stuck in their walk with God, not because they don't know enough or because they aren't disciplined enough, but because they have heart issues that they can't resolve. So we try to help people understand how to resolve those heart level issues.
And that's a great summary that we're going to expand on. So if you've been around Crazy Cool Family much, you know that our parent to God relationship is super important to us. And we want you to be able to present the healthiest version of you to your marriage, to your family. And also the things we'll talk about with discipleship will be in our parent to kid relationship as we take the principles we're going to talk about and try to model it for our children and help them to model it themselves. And, you know, that we want to build self-control in them. We want them to have their own relationship with God. So this is so Marcus and his team with a Deeper Walk model he has just spent decades, I would bet, in studying how to do discipleship. It's a very unique method, as well as studying the brain. He's done a lot of stuff with studying the brain and how the brain works, and even the brain of our small kids. And so we're going to talk about some things and just kind of bounce around from parent to kid as we go through his discipleship model. The model has the acronym of FISH, and so we can start to remember it by FISH. And the first piece of it is freedom. As a child of God, I'm looking on his website right here. Freedom is your birthright, but freedom's not automatic. So, and help us with freedom as a believer.
Certainly. So our model is anchored in the baptismal idea that I'm buried with Christ, right? And so you ask the question, why? Why did I die with Christ? Why is that such an important thing? And the answer is freedom. I die with Christ because that sets me free from the law. It sets me free from sin. It sets me free from the devil, sets me free from the world. And it becomes foundation number one for a deeper walk with God. And that is, if I'm going to go deeper in my walk, I have to, in my discipling, experience greater freedom from those things that want to enslave me. And I think we all have things in our lives that have enslaved us. We've all have battles that we go through. And so freedom is, I think, a lifelong issue that we're working on. And so we are given our freedom instantly at conversion, but now we have to learn how to live it out. It's like, how do I not live with a slave mentality? How do I live with a freedom mentality? How do I not live like a slave now that I have been set free? What does that look like? How do we do that? So we focus on spiritual warfare, we focus on emotional healing, and we focus on building resilience as 3 keys to helping people live with greater freedom.
And so along with freedom, the next one, the I part of it is identity. So, freedom and identity kind of go together, right? Would you kind of teach those together?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like we died with Christ, we're raised with Christ. And why are we raised with Christ? To a new identity. We are seated with Christ in the heavenly realms, which gets us a position of authority. We're adopted so that we have new intimacy. We have access that we didn't have before. And so one of the ways I illustrate this is with the idea of a well. And that is, there was a missionaries who who wanted to dig wells for people to have fresh water. And they were in India and they found a well. And but the thing was clogged, and it would actually turned into the town dump. People just threw their trash in this thing. So they went in and decided to reclaim it. And the first thing they had to do was get out all the trash, get out all the junk. Next thing they had to do, clean it out. And then they got down to the bottom and they found out that there was the stones at the bottom had collapsed. The foundation had collapsed and was clogging the spring. So they reset the foundation. They got that stable, and then water began to refill the well. and it became a source of life to the whole community. And so you can kind of see fish here. The first, they had freedom. They had to do stuff to get unclogged. They had to get
Hmm.
this stuff out. Identity is the foundation on which we build, and that is our identity in Christ is that no one can lay any foundation than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. That's the foundation. And then the water is the spirit. And that is that we now, the goal is to live a spirit-led life and walk in the spirit. So freedom and identity and spirit all kind of collect together. And the idea of the H, the heart-focused community, is this idea that we can't do this alone. We aren't meant to do it alone. We're meant to do it in community. And communities, however, can be shallow, which doesn't really help. Communities can be toxic, which makes it hard to grow at all. But if you get a heart-focused community that is really working together on freedom, identity, and walking in the spirit, you get something really powerful and profound that will always lead to mission. So that's kind of our model.
Freedom, identity, spirit, heart-focused community. So now, so as a parent, a lot of people coming into this, coming into faith, maybe we've either been a Christian for a while or we've not. That identity piece, I'm just again reading on your website here what Christ has done for us, and also who God has uniquely made us to be. So, for parents maybe that aren't in a church that's emphasizing identity,
Sure.
how do you, man, that you just said we're not slaves, we are no longer orphans, we are children of the King. There is an identity. Man, how do you convince, what do you say to people in this, in your discipleship thing that helps people come from, oh no, I'm a sinner,
Right.
I'm just a sinner saved by grace and I'm always a sinner and there's no other way I can be. I sin. See, here's where I am. How do you tell people who they are in Christ?
So I tell people that it's all based on the new covenant. And if you think about marriage, the most common covenant in the world is the marriage covenant. And when you get married and you put on the ring and you go through the ceremony and you sign the papers, right? You went from having an identity of being single to an identity of being married. If you keep acting like you're single, that marriage is not going
There's
to
going to
go.
be consequences
There's
to
going to
that,
be
right?
consequences, right? So, because your identity has changed, the foundation now for the way you live has changed. You went from being an alone person to two becoming one. And now that the two are one through the covenant, you want to learn how to live out that oneness in the rest of your marriage. So, covenant establishes the foundation, and then we live out from that covenant. Well, the same thing happens with our identity in Christ. And you can think of the idea of the new covenant does four things. And you can remember what the word pact, like pact and covenant, kind of go together. The first thing is we are pardoned for our sin, which means I've been justified and I have been completely forgiven. And that has reconciled me to God. So I'm pardoned for my sin is number one. The A is I've been adopted into God's family. And because I'm adopted, I actually love the story of the prodigal son here and how when he came back to the father, he didn't say, fine, crust of bread, have a little something here, right? He gave him his best robe. He put a ring on him, and that ring let everybody know he's got authority to do business as part of this family, right? He's been
Right.
completely restored. And there was a party thrown, and we get this whole idea adoption is a big deal. And then C is citizenship. I'm no longer of this world and no longer a citizen of the world primarily. I'm now a citizen of the kingdom. And so that citizenship changes so that I now live with an eternal perspective. I want to know, I want to think with a kingdom worldview about how I approach life now because my citizenship has changed. And then the last one is my title has changed. As you mentioned, sinner saved by grace. We all still sin. We understand that, but that's no longer my title.
Right.
Right? My title is saint. And this idea of saint in the New Testament is everywhere, right? And it's used to some pretty bad people doing a lot of bad stuff, but they're called saints because sainthood simply means you belong to God now. You're his. And because God's put his stamp on your life and you're now his, you are holy and you are set apart from the things of this world. So all of those then become the foundation out of which we want to live. I want to live like a person who's been forgiven by extending forgiveness to others, by not going back to the sin that for which I've been forgiven. I want to live like someone who's been adopted and is who is deeply loved by my Father. I want to live with a kingdom worldview. I want to, live like somebody who is already a saint and trying to be consistent with that, as opposed to someone who's trying to earn it.
So instead of living to please God, we're living out of that love. I mean, and that's been the biggest transformation for me of identity is I don't live to please God. He's pleased with me. And that was really hard for me to grasp, still is in some ways, that, oh, did God see how I acted today? And yet he's pleased with me. How does that work? But,
Yeah.
but that's what it says, that
It's a hard thing for a lot of people to wrap their head around. So I actually use like this 4 level diagram to help people with this. My dad developed this, but it's called um, it starts with the words authority. The idea is that when I perform for God, I start with the idea that God's the authority, and I am accountable to that authority. And if I act properly, then He will affirm me. And if I get enough affirmation, then He'll accept me. But acceptance comes at the bottom of the process. First, I got to meet this authority and I got to please him and I got to get, affirmation that I did a good job and then I'll be accepted. But grace flips that, right? The whole point of grace is we start with acceptance because of what Jesus did, right? Because I'm in the family now because of what Jesus did. So I'm already accepted. That's done. He then affirms me and says, "You're a deeply loved person. I am vested in us having a good relationship together, right? Because I love you." So affirmation comes next, and then comes, and so be accountable to my authority because of these things. But the whole model flips. And that's really what grace does. Grace flips the model for us so that acceptance is the beginning of the process and not the end of the process.
yeah, that's good. And um, the sorry, my granddaughter is interrupting our
I'd say,
podcast here.
imagine a parenting podcast with kids.
That's fine. She's looking at me and yelling at me through the deal here, but yeah, and and even that's prophetic almost because the way I look at her is the way God looks at me. And to think about that from that God looks at me like, that 1 year old granddaughter can do no wrong. I mean,
Right.
she's just an amazing human being. And I just see her and I love her in a way that is different than, my friend across the street over here or people like, so, so let me ask you this question. So now let's go to parenting a little bit. How do we instill freedom, identity, spirit into our children? And in what age is that appropriate? We were just talking
Right.
before the podcast about how the brain of kids are different development stages or whatever.
Mhm.
So how do you take freedom and identity and put it into your kids?
Yeah, so there's age appropriate things, right? And that is, so I would define the infant years not as just babies crawling around, but I put infant and toddler together and say, from those infant toddler years from birth until about 3 or 4 years old, at that point, information isn't the main thing, right? Getting them to repent of sin is not the main thing. What we're after there,
But to
right?
stop there, I mean, that is once a child turns two, we hit those terrible twos. That is a lot of parents' intention. They think with good intention, and I realize that we do need to have our kids not be brats. That's true. But I mean, obedience and behavior is their priority. And you're saying
So,
probably
yeah.
needs to be a different focus.
So the two priorities at that age level are attachment and identity. Now, the way the brain develops a sense of identity is through attachment. And so what happens is very early on, before the child has words at their disposal, they learn pretty quickly whether or not there's somebody who brings you joy or doesn't bring you joy. And they learn pretty quickly whether that joy is conditional. And so what happens is that from a brain perspective, the joy center of my brain and the identity center of the brain are the same part of the brain. And that is the more as a 1, 2, 3 year old that I can have big emotions and have somebody remain relational with me and recover from those emotions, the more secure and stable my identity will be. And so at that age level, I'm not teaching them about covenants. I'm not teaching them about pardons and adoption, right? Those are two advanced concepts for somebody at that age. All I'm trying to do right there is make sure that they know that they are loved and that there's nothing that they can do that will risk that love. And so I want to then, when it comes to the obedience part of it, I just want to make sure that obedience is put in the proper context for kids. That my priority is not behavior. My priority is attachment. I want them to feel safe and secure with me. I want them to know that they are seen in their big emotions and that they're going to get help with those big emotions and not simply scolded if they have them.
Well, does that mean I just let them throw fits and do whatever they want and just squeal and cry all over the place?
No, but it what it means is that but how you handle it is going to look different. In other words, you can't like discipline it out of them at that age because they don't understand what's going on. So what you want to do in those early years is you want to do things like hold them while they're upset, encourage them to make eye contact with you. And like, do you see me? Get them nodding their head. Do you understand? I'm still happy to be with you now. Yes. Okay. And what you're trying to do is help them know they are not alone in this big, overwhelming emotion, because the scariest thing in the world is an emotion I don't think I can handle. And kids have them every day, right? Especially at that age. They got an emotion they don't think they can handle. So my first job as a parent is to be the bigger brain who is not overwhelmed and who is stable and secure when they're losing it. But too often we lose it when they lose it. And that doesn't teach them anything other than, okay, if I don't keep it together, my whole world will become unstable. So it's not that behavior doesn't matter, but we put it in perspective with the other thing. This is a lower priority at that age.
And I love it what you said that
Yeah.
identity or attachment, which leads to identity. So attachment is the key factor to lead to identity. And attachment is more important than obedience, than even than control. I mean, so often the child is though, this little one that just interrupted us here, just in the last couple of weeks, has all of a sudden just gone to when she's emotional and she just all of a sudden just throws her head back and just throws this, fit. But then if we just pick her up and we'll talk to her and say, hey, you're throwing a fit or whatever, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's what I was doing. That security, what I'm hearing you say is that security when they are in the middle of that emotion is super important.
Yeah, the kids need hundreds or thousands of memories of somebody remaining relational with them when they are in distress.
Yeah, wow. I just got through watching Inside Out 2, and as they're
Okay.
going through all the different emotions, that's just such a great, I think, movie to watch. Both of them, just because they talk about emotions and how
I
teenagers
haven't
or
seen
kids
that
are
one
dealing
yet,
with.
but I'll have to check it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really good. But that's what made me think about it. But yeah. So when you're giving identity and freedom, and so as a kid gets older, so then how do you give freedom and identity to a grade school kid, let's say?
Yeah. So when you get in that grade school category, there's a couple things that happen. One is they're now interacting with other kids. So they're going to get their identity not just from you. Other people are going to give them an identity. They're going to tell them things like, you're stupid, you're fat, you're no good, right? They're going to hear stuff like that. So part of what you're doing is you're helping them recognize the emotion. What does that make you feel? Right. And
Right.
you're helping them use their words. In the grade school category, you're now saying, I don't want to just take care of this for you. I'm going to take care of it with you and help you learn to use your words as we talk about this. But I can't expect them to do it on their own. I got to train them how to do that. Like that felt pretty icky, didn't it? That felt, you probably felt some shame there. And you're giving them like, yeah, that was shame. Yeah, shame feels really, really bad. So the process we use, we call VCR. VCR is validate the emotion and then comfort them. And I can explain the process, and then that leads to recovery. Our goal is to help them recover from their upsetting emotions so they feel like themselves again. So you
Yeah,
start
you're
by
going to have to
validating.
update that acronym probably because not many
Yeah,
people that's not our age remember a VCR.
I get it. And so I'm like, haven't come up with a better one yet,
No,
but
that's good.
Yeah, the idea of validating here is that you want to name you want to name the emotion accurately, and you want to name how big the emotion is accurately. So for example, if your child is just moderately irritated, you don't say, "Why are you so mad?" Right? Because that's not the right size. They're not that mad. They're moderately irritated. If if the child is feeling fear, I don't know, why are you so angry? Right? Because that's not actually the correct emotion. So that to validate, you have to be accurate. And what you're doing with validation is you're reading their body language, you're reading what's going on, and you're saying, this is what's going on with you, isn't it? Now,
Right.
here's the key. You don't have to agree that they should be doing that, right? You
Right.
don't have to agree that they should be throwing a fit right now.
Yep.
And you don't have to shame them for throwing the fit right there. What you're doing when you validate is you're saying you are, in fact, really angry right now. And maybe even give them language like at a level 8 or a level 10, this feels really big to you, doesn't it? And the goal is to get them nodding, like, yes, you have seen me correctly. You have seen and you have noticed, and I feel seen right now. And so then you can go to comforting. And there's three, you think of it like a triangle. There's three things we do to comfort a child. The first one is we tell them what's not going to happen. Well, don't worry, you're not getting spanked right now. Don't worry, this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen. And that lowers the stress level. And then you give them a new perspective. Well, what if we looked at it this way? And then you give them a simple 1 or 2 step plan.
Right.
Can you do this? Yeah. It's like, well, you think you could go and draw a picture right now about something? And they're like, yeah, I think I can. And the goal is, okay, can you take a deep breath? Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I think that addresses so much about, so often when a child comes to us and says, "Oh my goodness, my toy broke." Okay,
Yes.
to us, it's a toy. There's probably going to be another toy come, and we can see it from a bigger picture, a bigger perspective. But we tend to say, "Oh, we dismiss it because
Right.
to us, it's not that big a deal." But to the child, it's a huge deal. And
Right.
and, and what I hear you saying is, we've talked about identity and stuff, but also just what you've said a lot of times is how, seeing the child, that the child says, when we dismiss the toy because it's irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, they don't have to pay the bills and the mortgage and everything else and fix the car. So it is, but yet it is important to them and we can see them. And yet then what you're saying though is then start to provide some alternatives. Hey, you know what? Well, hey, that's broken, but I'm sure that there's more, behind that. God's good. He's going to provide those type things.
Exactly. So what it says, the order here is really important. The two mistakes we tend to make is to minimize something or to go straight to solving the problem. And we skip, but if you solving the problem is actually part of the comforting part.
Yeah.
And so you have to validate the emotion first, and then you can solve the problem. And so a lot of us, we skip
But
that.
to
Or,
put that in English a little bit
yeah,
is that
sure.
if we don't see them first,
Right.
they're not going to be open to our solutions.
Right. Sometimes just solving the problem, if you haven't shown that you see them and understand where they're coming from,
Yeah.
it will feel to them like you don't care and you just want to get rid of them.
Yes, exactly. That they feel dismissed.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's awesome. So I just think that's so valuable so just like, and isn't it it's just like us, we want to be seen. Everybody
Yes.
wants to be seen and heard. That's what God's saying to us. He says, "Hey, I created you. I see you. I love you. I'm crazy about you actually. And I just want you to come to me and surrender in and so good. And when we can do that as parents, we start to build identity into our children, which means they will want to walk in the spirit. That
Yes.
that will be a desire for their heart.
And so one of the things that I start teaching once they get into the word stage, they're the elementary school age, is I start teaching them intentionally wisdom. And what the Old Testament calls wisdom, the New Testament calls walking in the Spirit. They're basically the
Good.
same thing. And so the idea is, look, I love you. My desire for you is I want you to be successful. I want you to have a good life. The path you're on right now with this behavior is not going to take you there.
Right.
Right. So I need to stop you as a good parent. I need to stop you right now and say that behavior is not going to work. we got to get you on a different path, and we got to get you on a path that's going to end in you having lots of friends and you having lots of success in life, and you becoming the person that you really want to be. And so I kind of contextualize the behavior change. Now, there's a couple of things you want to do. First of all, you do expect obedience first, and then you answer why. You
Hmm.
don't want to go down the path of answering why before the behavior changes, or you're setting yourself up for a lifelong debate.
Right. That's why you just argue with your kids over and over again.
Yeah. And so if they say, why should I? You say, I will explain that later. For right now, I just need you to obey me.
And
And
and and again,
that's the proper response at that point.
and that's the way God asked us to do it too, is to
Yeah.
obey first, and then we get the explanation as life goes on.
Yeah. It's not that I say, I'm never going to explain it. You just got to trust me. There's a couple things I might do that with, but I say, I'll explain this later. Right now, you just need to obey. And I'll ask the question, are you going to obey right now?
Right. Yeah,
And
so fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. Which then and then what's down the bottom of the fish is just moving to mission. I love the idea that mission is kind of at the end, because mission, you really need to have your heart in place. So often we see missionaries go out, for example, and they're not prepared, and they come back wounded and bruised and all that because they weren't prepared properly for the mission field. In a way, in our lives, it's the same thing. We need to get prepared, and then we can go out into the mission field, right?
yep. So yeah, my father was the director of the School of World Missions and Evangelism at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. So dealt
Mhm.
with missionaries his whole life. And he often said that the number one reason missionaries come back from the mission field is that they can't get along with the other missionaries.
Wow.
And he said as many as 50% of missionaries leave missions over relational issues. The other thing we find, a lot of people in ministry are getting their identity from ministry and
Right.
not getting into ministry because they're secure in their identity. And so if I'm going into ministry to prove myself to God, or if I have to constantly prove myself to God over and over again by being successful in ministry, now everything's flipped. It's all turned upside down. And that's why this is so important. Same thing with parenting. I don't, I can't, I'm not being a good parent to please God and to try to make him happy and to show, and to earn something from him by performing well as a parent. I can fall into that, but that's just the flesh. What I'm doing is I'm trying to love my children well, and I'm trying to love them the way that Jesus loved me. And he sees us, Jesus sees us, he hears us, right? He loves us, he connects with
Mhm.
us, and he also corrects us, and he gets us on the right path. And he wants to grow our skills and grow our ability to be disciplined. Self-discipline is a fruit of the Spirit. So, but all these things are happening out of that they flow out of love. I will also just comment real quickly here, and that is that all of us are going to have mixed motivations at times. There's times we do things out of fear, and there's times we do things out of joy, and sometimes we got a little bit of both. And when it comes to parenting, there can be a lot of fear. Like, I'm going to mess this kid up. I'm going to do
Right.
this. I'm going to do this so bad that they're going to, there's going to be no recovery here. And I have to be careful that I'm not constantly motivating myself as a parent out of fear. Instead, I need to acknowledge that I have some fear about that. That's okay to admit I've got some fear about that. But I'm going to look for what there is to be joyful about in this parenting process right
Mhm.
here. And that makes all the difference in the world, because kids pick up really quickly if I am afraid or if I am joyful.
Right, right. And
And
they
that,
react to that. And basically, you were even saying before the podcast that a young child will react more to your body language than they will to the words, because they really don't get the words. They're like a
yeah, no,
dog, all they hear is blah, 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 do this or whatever. But they're really, so much of parenting young children is so much about our body language.
yeah, it really is. Because you think about it, it's like we don't really teaching kids how to use their words with emotional things until they're like about age 4, right? It takes a little time for them to start really getting connected. Now, we start maybe at age 2, 3 beginning, but it's not until about age 4 that we expect them to actually know what that means. So in our what's happening is that kids get really good at reading us and reacting to us. And because of that, a lot of parents expect their kids to read their body language and to attune to them instead of being the, as I said before, the bigger brain, the adult who is actually attuning to that person. So how many times do we go in and say, do you see how angry I am? Do you see me right now? Do you want to make me mad? Do you
Right.
see what you're doing to me? And we put all the pressure on them to read us correctly and get this thing right. When what we need to be doing is, I see you and I see what
Yeah.
this is doing to you.
Yeah.
And
We're the
but
adult,
don't,
right?
yeah, let's be the adult, right? That's
Yeah,
really boils
exactly.
in.
Wow. Well, man, just Marcus, we could do this for, I mean, I just love your wisdom in both discipleship and then how it relates to parenting because it really is. We get discipled first, and then out of that, we go disciple our kids. So much of this, and we do it in age appropriate ways. Um, so really, what I wanted you guys to do today in our podcast, our audience, is to just hear from, Marcus and Dr. Warner, if we will, and really just get to know him a little bit so that you can go to his website and see more. He's got, a bunch of books he's written, a couple of parenting books are in there, as well as, discipleship. There's the 4 Habits of Joy-Filled Marriages, so many different resources there. What would you recommend in terms of telling people how do we start to unpack Dr. Marcus Warner in our lives, so to speak?
No, I appreciate that. That's kind of you. Deeperwalk.com is our website. And if you're going to start, like, what's the discipleship all about? We have a free course called A Deeper Walk. And I wrote a book with Moody Publishing that's connected to that. So they can get the book, they can go that free course. That's where to start A Deeper Walk. If they specifically want to start with parenting, then I would get the book, The 4 Habits of Raising Joy-Filled Kids. And that's going to walk you through. Now, that book, I will be honest, was not written from a discipleship perspective. It was actually written kind of like the 5 love languages. It's from the same
Right,
publisher.
right.
And the idea is that this is a book that you can give to your non-Christian friends about the brain science and attachment theory of parenting and what that looks like for infants, what it looks like for young kids, what it looks like as they become adults. And so that would be the book if you're particularly interested in
Now,
parenting.
there's also the 4 Habits of Joy-Filled People. So
Yes.
if the parents are, is that similar book? Is it a similar?
So that one is specifically on resilience, and they overlap because the idea is we want to build resilient kids. So the parenting book is really about is asking the question, how do I grow an emotionally resilient child? That's what we're really talking about. And joy-filled person is an emotionally resilient person. So it makes sense if I'm going to be a parent who's raising an emotionally resilient child, I need to be an emotionally resilient person. So what does that look like? And so in that book, we talk about in our inner world, we have 2 houses. We have a joy house and we have a fear house.
Mhm.
And if I'm living in my fear house too much in my inner world, I just avoid it. I don't want to go there. And that
Right.
means I want quiet in my life. I want to stay busy. I want to stay distracted. I want to, because I don't like my inner world. And so part of emotional resilience is how do I grow my joy house so that I have a place in my inner world that I actually enjoy being? And we teach people how to do that. How do you move from fear motivations to joy motivations in life? And the parenting book is really how do I motivate my children joyfully and not constantly resort to fear in motivating my kids to do what I want them to do. And so that's kind of the what they have in common.
Yeah, that's good. And there's lots of books there, in deeperwalk.com. What I like to do with someone like, Marcus, who just has really devoted, decades of writing, just research, everything from brain to parenting to discipleship to everything is, and just start to sample and see how it works with you. And then, you know, I've had people like him become very influential in my life, even though I never knew them, but through reading their works and doing the discipleship stuff. So Deeper Walk is one of those ways. I've talked with Marcus, really lines up with a lot of things Crazy Cool Family's doing in terms of identity, relationship, purpose, culture in your home, all these things. And starting with the parent to God relationship, that the best thing you will do is to present your family the best version of you. And so often we're focused on our kids And God says, hey, why don't you let that, get that log out of your own eye so you can see the speck and see your kids differently. So many resources here to help you with that. Yeah, Marcus, thank you for being on with us. Anything else you want to tell them about anything connecting with you, anything coming up? I think you have a podcast, right, as well?
Yeah, my daughter, who is 33, she and I do a podcast together,
Oh,
and
that's fun.
yeah, so it's pretty fun, and we cover all kinds of things from spiritual warfare to neuroscience and everything in between on this podcast. So that's a great way to get to know who we are, is to check that out.
Amazing stuff. Deeperwalk.com. Thank you, Marcus, for being on with us, and again, go check it out. To the Crazy Cool Family people, just go check it out. I think you'll find some great resources there. So thanks again, Marcus.
Appreciate it, Don.
And as always, parents, go be crazy. crazycoolfamily.com. Thanks for listening to the Crazy Cool Family podcast. We hope this episode inspired and challenged you to invest in your family. We want every family in the world to know about God's vision for their family. To help get the word out, consider taking a minute and giving our podcast a 5-star review and share why you love listening. Or share our podcast on social media with your friends and family. We believe that family is God's idea, so help us spread his vision for family by telling others about our podcast today.